3 types of unsatisfactoriness. Question. Since only one part of sensation is unpleasant in its intrinsic nature, how can one say that all impure conditioning forces are unsatisfactory? Answer. There are 3 kinds of unsatisfactoriness. 1. The kind of unsatisfactoriness which is pain. 2. The kind of unsatisfactoriness which is the fact of being conditioned, or the unsatisfactoriness of the conditioning forces. And 3. The kind of unsatisfactoriness which is unfavorable transformation, or change, or decay, or the unsatisfactoriness based on unfavorable transformation, or change, or decay. Due to these 3 kinds, all impure conditioning forces, without exception, are unsatisfactoriness. The agreeable factors are unsatisfactory because they are subject to unfavorable transformation or change. The disagreeable factors are unsatisfactory because they are unpleasant in and of themselves. And the neither disagreeable nor agreeable factors are unsatisfactory because they are conditioned. Question. What are the agreeable, disagreeable, and neither disagreeable nor agreeable factors? Answer. The 3 sensations in order, and, due to the 3 sensations, all conditioning forces conducive to pleasant experience, etc., receive the name agreeable, disagreeable, neither disagreeable nor agreeable. As the sutra states, pleasant sensation is pleasant when it arises, pleasant when it abides, but unsatisfactory when it changes. As the sutra states, unpleasant sensation is unsatisfactory when it arises, unsatisfactory when it endures. As the sutra states, that which is impermanent is unsatisfactory. The same applies to the conditioning forces conducive to these sensations as for these sensations themselves. All conditioning forces are unsatisfactory on account of being conditioned, and they are seen under this aspect only by the noble ones. As it is stated, one does not feel an eyelash placed on the palm of the hand, but the same eyelash getting into the eye causes suffering and harm. Likewise, the foolish, similar to the hand, do not feel the eyelash, that is the unsatisfactoriness which is the fact of being conditioned. However, the noble ones, similar to the eye, are tormented by it. To noble ones, the idea of existence in the most sublime heaven is more unsatisfactory than the idea of existence in the most horrifying hell is to fools. Objection. But one would say the path is conditioned. It should thus be unsatisfactory through the fact of the unsatisfactoriness due to being conditioned. Reply. The path is not unsatisfactory, because the definition of unsatisfactory is to be odious or adverse. Now, the path is not odious or adverse to the noble ones because it produces the destruction of all the unsatisfactoriness of arising or origination. When they consider nirvana as fortunate or peaceful, that which they consider as fortunate or peaceful is the cessation of that which they have considered as unsatisfactoriness. That is, the impure conditioning forces, and not the cessation of the path. Question. But since the agreeable does exist, why is it only unsatisfactoriness, and not the agreeable, the truth of the noble ones? Answer. According to one explanation, because of the meagerness of the agreeable, just as one calls a pile of beans in which there are some peas, so as no sensible person would consider an ulcer as agreeable because they experience a very small agreeable sensation when they wash this ulcer. And further, the noble ones conclude that the agreeable is, de facto, mere pain, because it is a cause of pain, because it is produced by or connected with many kinds of pain, because one desires it only when pain exists. But even if existence were accompanied by the agreeable, existence in its totality has the same flavor of unsatisfactoriness which is the fact of being conditioned. The noble ones thus consider it as unsatisfactoriness. That is why unsatisfactoriness is the truth of the noble ones and not the agreeable. Question. But how can the noble ones regard the sensations which are agreeable in their intrinsic nature as being unsatisfactoriness? Answer. Because they are odious or adverse due to their impermanence. Just as the noble ones consider material forms, ideations, etc. as unsatisfactoriness, even though material forms, ideations, etc. are not unsatisfactoriness in the same way as disagreeable sensation. Question. But if the noble ones see the agreeable as unsatisfactoriness because it is impermanent, what is the difference between the aspects or modes of activity of impermanent and unsatisfactory? On the one hand, seeing factors as unsatisfactory, on the other hand, seeing factors as impermanent, there would be confusion. Answer. One sees factors as impermanent because their nature is to arise and perish. One sees them as unsatisfactory because they are odious or adverse. When one has seen them as impermanent, they become odious or adverse. The characteristic or aspect or mode of activity of impermanent implies or attracts the characteristic of unsatisfactory, but does not become confused with this characteristic. The sutra states, sensation, whatever it may be, is included in unsatisfactoriness. The agreeable sensation should be regarded as unsatisfactory. It is a mistaken ideation to regard as agreeable that which is unsatisfactory. The causes of pleasure are not always the causes of pleasure. Factors that are considered to be causes of pleasure, food and drink, coolness, warmth, etc., become causes for suffering when they are enjoyed too much or at the wrong time. But it is not possible that a cause of pleasure produces suffering because it has increased or because while remaining the same it appears at another time. Therefore, these supposed causes of pleasure are from the very beginning causes of suffering and not causes of pleasure. But only at the end, when this suffering caused by them has increased, does it become manifest. The same applies to the alternations of the four bodily deportments, the deportment of lying down, sitting, etc. The notion of pleasure has for its object not a real pleasure, but sometimes a remedy for suffering, sometimes a modification of suffering. As long as one is not tormented by the suffering caused by hunger and thirst, cold and heat, fatigue, attachment to pleasure, for so long is there no sensation that one experiences as agreeable. Consequently, the ignorant have the notion of pleasure, not in regard to true pleasure, but in regard to the reduction or remedy of suffering. The foolish also have the notion of pleasure in regard to the modification of or mere relief from suffering. For example, when shifting a load from one shoulder to the other. Consequently, the agreeable does not exist.